Has the war on Fox backfired on Obama and company, and should other journalists be getting a bit nervous? Joining us now, Nico Pitney, national editor of the Huffington Post, Jane Hall, professor of media at American University, and Amanda Carpenter, who writes the Hot Button column for the Washington Times. Amanda, Carpenter, is the White House trying to isolate Fox News and make other news outlets feel embarrassed about following Fox stories?
It's pretty clear they are. You've seen essentially a talking point go from all the way from the deputy communications person all the way to Barack Obama that Fox News is not a legitimate news organization. If you look at their statements, that's what they've all been saying, as you said, over the last 14 days. And I think it is backfiring, A, because it's an attack on the media, and two, other networks, this is such a big story, other networks have to cover it.
The president this week in an interview likened Fox News to talk radio. Nico Pitney, we heard Hannity say there that they want to silence us. They want us to shut up. Anybody muzzling Fox News?
No, of course, although I agree with Amanda. The White House is taking on Fox News, and it's exactly the right thing to do. I mean, if the Republican National Committee had a television network, how would it be any different? And Fox admits it. I mean, you've got the senior vice president of programming.
Wait a second. Fox says that they have reporters who cover the news.
Oh, sure.
And they have opinion guys like O'Reilly and Hannity.
But occasionally they slip up, and you have the senior vice president of programming say in an interview that Fox News is the voice of the opposition. I mean, they parade as objective journalists, and some of them do good journalism, but by and large, the network is a 24-hour campaign against the administration.
Well, I want to come back to that point, but let me turn to Jane Hall. You were a Fox News contributor for 11 years. What do you make of the administration argument that it's not really a news network?
Well, you know, I think you do have to differentiate between their commentators and their news. And I don't think this is a good strategy for the Obama administration. I personally think they've made a point. Now move on, put Obama on O'Reilly, go on Chris Wallace's show. I think they look like whiners. I think that it is fair to say, though, that Media Matters, the liberal watchdog group, did a compilation tape that does show that there's been a campaign to say Obama was a socialist, a communist, a racist on news programs as well as on commentary.
When you appeared regularly on O'Reilly, were you there as a kind of a token from the dreaded MSM?
Well, I was there as a defender of the MSM, and you wouldn't believe how many famous journalists I talked to who said, better you than me, let me tell you my side of the story. They didn't want to come on. It's hard to do because it was like, when did you quit beating your wife? That was usually the question, but I felt it was worth doing.
Do you consider yourself a liberal?
No.
But you were paired with Bernie Goldberg, who takes the conservative point of view, who wrote a book about the media's slobbering love affair with Barack Obama. So is that a fair pairing to have somebody who has that point of view and you consider yourself a journalist, right?
I consider myself a journalist. I'm now able to state opinions because I'm a professor.
Right.
I consider myself a moderate. I mean, in that universe, I was probably considered, you know, a wacky professor by O'Reilly. He would sort of pat me on the head and say, now, Jane, I know you liberals feel this way. And I'd say, no, I'm not really a liberal. So, yes, there's not necessarily a left-right comparison on there.
Amanda, why shouldn't the Obama White House push back against what it sees as unfair coverage, just as the Bush White House did when it used to criticize MSNBC, occasionally the New York Times and others?
I think every politician has the right to push back against what they perceive as being unfair. But what they're doing, they're acting like they don't know the difference between the news page and the editorial pages, the news programs and the editorial programs at Fox News. When you have Robert Gibbs saying, well, you know, I think you should watch the 5 o'clock and 9 o'clock hour to see how biased they are. Those are clearly opinion shows.
For people in different time zones, those are Beck and Hannity,
And they're acting like they don't know the difference, but I think it's just convenient for them because they need an enemy. There's no longer Bush, there's no longer Cheney. They tried it against Rush Limbaugh, so now they're trying to make it Fox News.
Don't you think there's so much evidence that the news programming also has a slant, and it's not just a political, it's factual and not factual. You have a Fox News anchor saying that falsely, and the facts are out there when he says it, that a gay Obama administration staffer is covering up statutory rape. I mean, that goes so far beyond the line, and it's about a war on the administration.
But at the same time, to act like other networks, MSNBC, you're inviting Rachel Maddow and Keith Olbermann to off-the-record parties to talk with them, to act like there's not this going on in other networks. I mean, look at the Rush Limbaugh quotes that everyone reported and ran with, and no apology.
Let me jump on these off-the-record lunch since you brought it up. Okay, Olbermann and Maddow were there, very liberal firebrands from MSNBC, and other liberal columnists were there, Maureen Dowd of the New York Times and Gene Robinson of the Washington Post, and some straight reporters as well, including CNN's Gloria Borger. How is that different from George Bush? And all presidents do this, bringing in Fred Barnes, Bill Kristol, Rich Lowry, Charles Krauthammer for off the record or background chats.
Yeah, and I think that's fine. I think
but you brought it up as this great talking point.
Right. Well, if you have Olbermann, who, he declares people the worst people in the world, and then to say that it's so horrible when Rush Limbaugh is tough on the presidency, well, you accept it from Keith Olbermann. That's not okay.
I think, that this has become a talking point for the Fox analysts, to Karl Rove, Pat Buchanan, who was part of the Nixon administration, going after the press, saying this is Nixonian. I mean, trust me, it is not Nixonian for them to go after this.
To Nico. One of the reasons I think that the Obama White House is losing at least the PR war on this is that a number of liberal columnists have said this is not a smart strategy. Clarence Page today says he agrees with Hannity, almost never agrees with Hannity on this. Ruth Marcus of the Washington Post used that phrase, Nixonian. So when you have people on the left, opinion people on the left saying that the Obama administration is not helping itself with this, that's got to give you some pause.
Yeah, I mean, there are people at mainstream outlets that take a very sanctimonious approach, and that's fine. I mean, there are plenty coming from an online outlet. I think there are so many. I mean, again, as from an online outlet, there are tons of folks who write for online publications that can't get press credentials at Congress or the White House. I mean, there are lots of journalistic flaws that no one complains about.
So you're saying it's all an establishment club?
Well, no, but I think part of it is. I mean, go ahead.
I think it's a mistake because you cannot beat Fox News at their own game. Roger Ailes likes to fight, which is to be combative, to take what people say. Their ratings are higher than they have ever been. So I think it's not a smart strategy for them to do it. I think you put your people on the shows where you think they'll get a shot. You don't whine. You get out there and you counter them.
I think the Obama administration has to go after them, but I agree with you about the Nixonian element. I mean, you think Dana Perino admitted the other day that the Bush administration froze out MSNBC towards the end of their administration. But the most memorable quote is from Ari Fleischer when Bill Maher, a comedian, not a journalist, made a crack about 9/11. He said at the press briefing, this shows that Americans have to watch what they do. Now that is Nixonian, and that was to a comedian, not a reporter.
I would say the reason why this is a mistake is because they're attacking the free press, and you don't go after the press, and people realize it's attacking the free press, which is why Jake Tapper asked the question, who are you to decide what's a legitimate organization? Because it is not the White House's job.
ABC's Jake Tapper asked Robert Gibbs that question at a White House briefing, and you had this other incident this week where there was a pool situation. 5 networks sometimes share cameras to share the cost as well, and the Treasury Department, with an interview with Ken Feinberg, the pay czar, tried to exclude Fox News. The other networks wouldn't stand for it. The administration backed down, and the White House apologized. So it seems to me that some journalists from other organizations are now saying this has gone too far.
Well, again, that's why I think it's a bad strategy. They've got ABC defending Fox. They've got other networks saying, wait a minute, we are more with these guys than we are with you.
What about when Jake Weisberg of Slate, writing in Newsweek magazine, says that Fox is un-American and that legitimate journalists should refuse to go on?
Well, that's his opinion, and he's being proven wrong.
Does that offend you?
It's his opinion. He can think and write whatever he wants, because I believe in the free press.
Did you feel like you were being used to give Fox a certain degree of legitimacy, coming on as a media professor and former LA Times reporter?
No, I didn't. I mean, the reason I left was in part because I think they have had less debate than they used to. But, it is a fair point to say, how much debate is there on MSNBC? I mean, how many Republican strategists? We have a bifurcation of the media that I think is going on.
The reason you left is because you feel they have less debate than they used to. In other words, it used to be Hannity and Combs, now it's just Hannity.
Right.
It used to be Bernie and Jane, now it's just Bernie.
Yeah, I think there's less debate than there was, and I'm also, frankly, uncomfortable with Beck, who I think should be called out as somebody whose language is way over the top and
was that
scary.
A factor in your deciding to leave Fox?
Yeah, it was.
All right. Let me give you my 2 cents here, which is this is also polarized now. You either have to take the position that Fox is a courageous news organization or a threat to Western civilization. I have criticized things that O'Reilly has said, that Hannity has said. Certainly on this program, I told Glenn Beck that he was being offensive with some words that he had for a Muslim member of Congress. At the same time, I don't think that an entire organization should be judged by a few commentaries any more than I think it's fair to judge CNN by the things that Lou Dobbs says. I mean, look at some of the people at Fox. I wrote down some names here. Major Garrett used to work at CNN. Bill Hemmer used to work at CNN. Greta Van Susteren used to work at CNN. Chris Wallace used to work at ABC and NBC. Did they all drink the Kool-Aid when they went there? Now, sometimes Fox's reflexive opposition to Obama bleeds into his news coverage, as you were saying, Nico. But I don't think it's fair to tar everyone with the same brush. You want to take that on?
Well, I mean, I think it does. I think you paint it a little too moderately. Take their flagship news program, Special Report with Bret Baier. George Mason University did a study. 80% of the coverage is negative. This is so far toward Obama.
Does that include the opinion roundtable?
That no, just the first 30 minutes.
Well, have we had a particularly rosy year so far in terms of the economy? I mean, would you expect to be 80% favorable?
But no. But I mean, if you talk about fair and balanced, this is not fair and balanced in the news coverage. It's not just Beck and Hannon.
I think we've had a lot of bad news.
Well, I think that you raise a very good point, and I've made that point too. I mean, I think Chris Wallace, Major Garrett, there are a lot of very good people there, and it's not a black and white universe. Unfortunately, we are living in a kind of parallel universe where you either hate or love one media outlet. I don't think that's a good thing.
And you can do it to MSNBC by saying, look at all the liberal hosts they have. Well, they do have Joe Scarborough.
Yeah, call me when Fox has 3 hours of programming given over to a Democratic congressman or a former Democratic congressman. I mean, this is just not comparable.
All right.